"Ethan's stepping into your role for the merger," said Richard Cole, CEO of Archon Systems, not bothering to look up from the French press he was pretending to understand. His voice had that hollow calm people use when they know they're about to light your career on fire. I stood perfectly still, didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just felt the tension coil through my neck like a live wire. 3 years. 3 brutal, caffeine-fueled years of cleaning up this company's chaos, rebalancing the books, tracing phantom invoices, untangling code written by ghosts with bad intentions, all so we'd be clean enough to sell. And now I was being sidelined for his son, Ethan Cole, a man whose most complex contribution to date was crashing the office espresso machine by confusing steam with startover. "It's a mentorship opportunity," Richard added, like he was offering me some sort of spiritual gift instead of stabbing a knife through my resume. "You've done the heavy lifting. Now Ethan can learn the ropes. Legacy stuff." Ah, there it was. Legacy. The corporate word for nepotism wearing a tuxedo. I smiled, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile women use in boardrooms when men confuse collaboration with obedience. He smiled back, blissfully unaware that my silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. My legacy, the $600 million merger I'd built from the ashes of a dying tech firm, had just been converted into a training sandbox for a trust fund dilettante with the charisma of a broken printer. I walked back to my office, heels striking the tile like gunfire through the glass corridor. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed the door and started organizing my files, not for handover, but for insurance. The thing about people like Richard is they assume competence equals compliance. They see silence and think they've won. But silence, my kind, anyway, means someone's already drawing blueprints for your downfall. By lunch, the rumor had metastasized across the building. Ethan was now the project lead. My inbox went dry. My calendar cleared itself like a desert storm had swept through. Colleagues who used to greet me with, "Got a sec?" now passed me like I was a ghost they were afraid to acknowledge. That was fine. Ghosts move unseen. Ghosts see everything. I complied. On paper. Attended transition meetings. Handed over sanitized project docs. Watched Ethan fumble through strategic briefings he clearly didn't read. Smiled through every second of it like I'd reached enlightenment at a yoga retreat instead of being sacrificed on the altar of family privilege. "You really set us up well," Ethan said one afternoon, flipping through a financial report I'd built line by line over 8 months. "All I have to do now is execute." He winked. Actually winked, as if we were partners in crime instead of me being the body buried under his career. "Execute indeed," I murmured, noting it in my planner. What Ethan didn't know, what Richard hadn't even remembered, was that the buyer's entire due diligence hinged on a particular escrow condition I'd personally designed. The source code vault was locked behind a physical hardware token, registered to one person only, me, Julia Reynolds. That token still sat zipped in the side pouch of my laptop bag, small, gray, unremarkable. But it might as well have been a nuclear launch key. No one had asked for it. No one even mentioned it. They were too busy celebrating Ethan's leadership. I spent the rest of the week smiling, training his assistant, cleaning up documentation like a dutiful consultant. But I didn't hand over everything. Not the final M&A checklist, not the encryption log, and definitely not the token. Because while Ethan was busy posing for a LinkedIn photo op, I was setting a stage. One that would remind every lawyer, every auditor, and every billion-dollar buyer exactly who built this empire and who still held the keys to its vault. By the time the office lights dimmed that Friday, I already knew what came next. Not revenge, precision. Revenge is messy. Precision is art. And I've always preferred clean lines. I waited until the building emptied out that night. The interns had long since vanished into the bars downtown. the executives into their Teslas and self-importance. I sat alone under the hum of the fluorescents, the office skyline flickering like static behind the glass. At 7:18 p.m., I opened a drive no one else remembered existed. It sat buried beneath 6 layers of folders with names like Archive Final V3 Old Temp, the kind of structure only the person who created it could ever navigate again. That person was me. Inside were the blueprints of the acquisition, every compliance document, escrow protocol, and legal handshake that made this $100 million deal possible. And most importantly, the escrow validation schema I had designed myself. The buyer, a Wall Street firm named Marin Holt Partners, had been explicit. They wanted zero risk of post-transfer tampering, zero risk of internal override. The escrow chain was sacred, protected by one hardware token tied to a single verified custodian identity. That custodian, Julia M. Reynolds, secondary custodian, none assigned, override permissions, none authorized. Meaning? Unless your name matched mine in the digital registry, that vault might as well have been a wall of encrypted granite. No password, no backdoor, no magic admin privilege, just silence. I scrolled through the PDF, my name glowing faintly under the timestamp, 03/21/2024, the day the deal became real. Back then, Richard had tried to shove Ethan into one of our buyer calls, saying, "He's going to take point soon. Just loop him in." The buyer's legal lead, a woman named Angela Park, had responded without blinking. "We prefer to maintain the current chain of command." Richard dropped it. Ethan drifted off. I never added his name. It wasn't a scheme back then. It was practicality. Clean, safe, efficient. But now, it was leverage. I went to the cabinet behind my desk, slid open the top drawer, and there it was. The token. Small, matte, gray. The kind of object that looks harmless until you realize it's the one thing standing between $1 billion valuation and a smoldering crater. I held it in my palm, the ridged edges pressing faint crescents into my skin. Not even our CTO had ever asked to see it. The CFO had signed the paperwork blind, the way men in golf polos sign everything they don't understand. And Ethan? If he even knew what a hardware token was, he probably thought it meant physical keyboard key. I slipped it into a small velvet pouch, then tucked that pouch between my charger and a half-finished granola bar in my laptop bag. Back at my desk, I wiped the access history from the archive drive and set up an auto-forward rule for any internal queries about the escrow chain. The message would go straight to legal with a single line. Per confidentiality clause, please consult project custodian of record. I wasn't paranoid. I was precise. There's a difference. The office buzzed faintly, the low electric hum of a system waiting for an input. I leaned back, eyes closed. It wasn't fear. It was stillness, like the moment before a roller coaster drops, when gravity forgets itself. They thought I'd step aside quietly, that I'd bow out and let the boys clean up after me. But behind that vault, behind every spreadsheet, every contract, and every ounce of intellectual property this company owned, there was one gatekeeper they'd conveniently forgotten. Me. 3 days later, Richard sent out the email. Exciting new direction. Ethan Cole to lead final acquisition talks, complete with a rocket emoji. I nearly laughed. There was a deal prep review on the calendar. I clicked maybe, then showed up anyway. The conference room was full. Finance, legal, engineering, every department that mattered. Ethan strutted in, wearing a navy polo so tight it looked vacuum sealed. He clapped his hands once like a high school coach about to ruin someone's knee. "All right, team," he said. "Let's win this thing." He fired up his slide deck. Slide 1, a spinning logo with sound effects. Slide 2, a revenue forecast powered entirely by delusion. Slide 3, bullet points that contradicted reality. He misquoted our burn rate by $4 million, invented user metrics, and used agile pipeline innovation like it meant something. But what really hit me, the real gut punch, was slide 7. It was my diagram, the color-coded acquisition map I'd built over 6 months. Only now, the header read, Lead, Ethan Cole. I took a sip of coffee. Bitter. Perfect. He ended the meeting with, "This is what leadership looks like." And I smiled, because I already knew what the ending looked like. The applause that followed was soft and sticky, like someone had just spilled honey on the carpet. Polite, forced, and impossible to clean up later. A few heads nodded. No one wanted to offend the boss's son, not when Richard's stare lingered like a surveillance camera on anyone who didn't smile enough. Ethan closed his laptop with a flourish. "Thanks, everyone. I know Melissa." He stopped, catching himself. "Julia did amazing groundwork. I'm honored to take it from here." He grinned, wide and hollow. I nodded like someone who'd just been thanked for her posthumous contributions. On my way out, he leaned closer. "Hope you picked up a few things from the presentation." I didn't answer. If I had, it might have come out in a language that burned. Instead, I walked straight to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and scribbled a new line on the small yellow note I kept hidden under my keyboard. The list I'd started the day Richard cut me out. Ethan presents my deck. Buyer analyst visibly uncomfortable. No one corrects him. I underlined it twice. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud and messy, the kind that burns fast and leaves nothing but smoke. This wasn't that. This was cold and measured, a quiet kind of fury that doesn't shout, it calculates. The next morning, the cracks began to show. An email appeared deep in a thread of 20 names from Angela Park at Marin Holt Partners. The subject line read, "Escrow validation, missing confirmation logs." The message was brief. "Can you confirm the current status of the vault verification process?" No confirmation logs were attached to Ethan's packet. I read it 3 times, slower each time, then leaned back in my chair. The silence that followed had weight. They'd noticed. The buyer's team, precise, relentless, allergic to incompetence, had finally looked past Ethan's polished nonsense and started inspecting the foundation. That night, another message landed. Subject: Compliance cross-check. Source vault credentials. Please provide documentation of credential chain, decryption authority, and access log since initial handshake. Escrow chain must reflect active custodianship. Translation: Show us who holds the key, and if you can't, the deal dies. Ethan replied with his usual word cloud of meaninglessness. "We're in the process of migrating those files to a new shared structure. My team's on it." His team consisted of a guy named Connor who once confused a CSV file for a text document and printed 200 blank pages. By noon the next day, a message popped up on Slack from Samantha in legal. "Hey Julia. Super random, but do you still have the original vault access log?" Ethan said maybe the handoff wasn't fully complete. No rush, just for backup. And there it was. The pivot. From "we're so grateful for your foundational work" to "maybe this is your fault." I didn't respond immediately. I finished my sandwich, ran a backup on my personal drive, and finally sent a 2-line reply. Attached, final signed access log chain and custody declaration. Custodian: Julia M. Reynolds. Please advise if further clarification is needed. I attached the notarized PDF, time-stamped, signed by the CFO, myself, and the external compliance officer. No commentary, no explanation, no hope this helps. Just the truth. Samantha responded half an hour later. "Got it. Thanks." That was the last I heard from legal, but not the last anyone heard about the vault. By Wednesday afternoon, whispers hardened into concern. The buyer's questions sharpened. Their calls grew shorter, colder. Who currently holds physical custody of the decryption key? When was the last validation test? Has Ethan Cole completed custodial clearance? Richard answered once, his confidence brittle. Ethan has full authority. That was a lie, one that could be disproven in a heartbeat. I still had the token. Ethan had never completed a clearance check in his life. By Thursday, tension hung in the air like static. The CTO, usually full of buzzwords and bravado, muttered to the CFO in the hallway, "They're going to walk. If we can't verify escrow, this whole thing collapses." Inside the glass conference room, Ethan was still talking about streamlining compliance pipelines like he'd just invented electricity. I took a sip of coffee, slow and deliberate, and wrote another note on my list. Buyer requests vault log. Ethan blames missing files on Julia's incomplete handoff. Legal confirms custody chain lists Julia only. CTO sweating bullets, auditors circling. The panic was spreading now. That corporate sickness that seeps through walls when leadership realizes the ground beneath them is cracking. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct the record. I didn't need to. Sometimes you don't have to start a fire. You just leave the gasoline where everyone can see it. The next day, the storm broke. It started with a meeting invite labeled simply, "Escrow Follow-Up, Urgent." The kind of corporate emergency that doesn't come with exclamation points, but makes everyone suddenly cancel lunch. I arrived early, coffee in hand, quiet as always. Through the glass wall, I could already see Ethan pacing. His shirt was half untucked, his face shiny with stress. The CFO sat stiffly beside him, pretending to read an old report. Richard stood near the window, phone in hand, murmuring something about optics and narrative control. When I walked in, the conversation stopped. "Julia," Richard said, too brightly, "thanks for joining. We just need to clear up a few minor technical details about the escrow validation." "Nothing major." I smiled. "Of course." Ethan jumped in. "Yeah, the buyer's asking for some unnecessary verifications. We've got it under control. But they're nitpicking on access credentials." "They're not nitpicking," I said softly. "They're verifying Clause 14.3, continuous custodianship of encryption authority." Ethan blinked, clearly hoping I'd stop talking before the words became complete sentences. The CTO cleared his throat. "The buyer's audit team says the vault failed to open during their simulation test." I tilted my head. "That's because the vault requires the physical token." Ethan frowned. "The what?" "The hardware key," I said. "Registered to the custodian of record. That would be me." The room went quiet. The kind of quiet you only hear before someone's career dies. Richard's face tightened. "So where is this token now?" "In my possession," I replied. Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, you still have it?" "Why would you still have it?" "Because no one asked for it," I said evenly. There was no documented handover, no authorization chain, and no buyer consent for reassignment. The escrow terms are clear. No transfer without written approval. The CFO finally looked up. "Can we override it?" The CTO's face drained of color. "Not without triggering an alert in the audit log. The buyer's team would see it immediately. They'd walk." Richard rubbed his temples, then fix it quietly. "Just handle it." The CTO shook his head. "It's impossible. The system doesn't care about job titles, only registered custodians." I could feel every pair of eyes on me, the same eyes that had looked past me for months. "Julia," Richard said, his voice suddenly soft, almost fatherly. "Help us out here. It's just a misunderstanding. Unlock the vault, let Ethan finalize the transition, and this can all be behind us." I met his gaze. "You'll need to file a formal request with legal. noting the custodial transfer, including buyer approval. Once that's signed and countersigned, I'll initiate the handoff. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. That could take weeks. I smiled faintly. Then I suggest you start drafting. Richard's composure cracked for the first time. His jaw tightened. Julia, this isn't the time to play games. I'm not, I said. I'm following procedure. The same one Marin Holt required before they agreed to your inflated valuation. The CFO shifted uncomfortably. If the buyer asks for another validation and we can't provide it, they will. The CTO interrupted, voice low. They've already flagged it as a compliance breach. Silence again, thicker this time. Ethan slumped into his chair, rubbing his forehead. This isn't how it's supposed to go, he muttered. Then maybe you should have read the manual, I said, gathering my papers. He glared up at me. You're enjoying this. No, I said, slipping my laptop into its case. I'm just the only one here who knows what integrity looks like. That afternoon, I received an internal memo titled Updated Deal Packet, Final Draft. The cover letter carried signatures from Ethan, the CFO, legal, and, inexplicably, the CTO. I opened it slowly, already suspecting what I'd find. They had removed Clause 9.4, the backbone of the escrow chain, the clause that mandated hardware token verification, custodian identity, and buyer consent for any override, was simply gone. Deleted, as if that could erase me. I sat back, not shocked, just impressed at the audacity. You can't delete a lock by pretending the key doesn't exist. I opened the original file I'd saved 6 months earlier and compared them line by line. It was like watching someone dismantle a bomb by cutting random wires. And so I did what any responsible professional would do. I opened my personal Gmail, attached the original, and sent it to Angela Park with a 3-word message. Let's begin logging. Then I stood, walked to the storage cabinet, and pulled out a small box labeled Old Invoices 2019-2020. Inside, beneath faded folders and receipts, was a velvet pouch. The token waited inside, smooth, silent, immutable. I placed it carefully in the box, added 2 documents, the original escrow protocol and the notarized buyer approval form, and wrote a note in blue ink. If opened, notify counsel immediately. Then I closed the lid, calm and steady. They thought deleting a clause would erase accountability. But I still had the key, and the system never forgets who it belongs to. She arrived at exactly 9 a.m. No warning, no small talk, just the soft click of leather heels against polished marble, and the sound of quiet authority entering a building that had forgotten what accountability felt like. Angela Park, lead auditor for Marin Holt Partners. I'd met her once, months ago, when the deal was still in early negotiations. She'd grilled me for 4 straight hours about compliance chains, vendor overlap, and security procedures. She was surgical then. Now, she looked like a scalpel walking in human form. Richard greeted her in the lobby with that over-rehearsed smile executives wear when charm is the only weapon left in the holster. Angela, so good to see you again. We're just tying up the last few loose ends, practically at the finish line. She nodded once, neither smiling nor replying, and followed him down the hall toward the conference room. I joined the group as a process continuity observer, the kind of title they give you when they can't legally keep you out but want to pretend you don't matter. Ethan trailed behind, fidgeting with his tablet, muttering acronyms that didn't belong in any real sentence. The conference room was glass-walled, sterile, humming with tension. Angela took the head seat, opened her laptop, and unfolded a stack of printed documents with surgical precision. Before we proceed with cap table verification, she said, eyes still on the screen, we'll need to walk through escrow validation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan gave a small, nervous laugh. Right, yeah. We're, migrating those systems. Everything's in motion. Angela didn't look up. That's not what we requested. Ethan swallowed hard. We've modernized a few workflows. The old system Julia set up, it was great, really thorough, but we've streamlined it. She raised 2 fingers, and he stopped talking mid-sentence. Then, without a word, she reached into her folder, pulled out a printed document, and slid it across the table. The title at the bottom read, Escrow Authorization Record, Original Signature Copy. This, she said, is the only registered custodian listed in our file. Ethan leaned forward, his face drained of color. On the line marked, Custodian of Record, was my name, Julia M. Reynolds, 03/21/2024. Well, yeah, he stammered. But we've made internal adjustments. Julia's technically still with the company, so we didn't think a formal reassignment was necessary. Angela looked directly at him for the first time. So, you altered the protocol without informing us? Richard tried to laugh, that desperate sound executives make when they realize they've walked into their own grave. Altered? No, of course not. We just evolved it. Angela turned to the CTO. Did you file a reauthentication request for custodial shift? The CTO hesitated. No. Did you log any override attempts? No, he admitted, barely audible. Angela leaned back, folded her hands, and said, Then the escrow vault remains under the sole authority of Julia Reynolds. Any access attempts made without her registered approval are in direct breach of Section 14.3 and Clause 9.4. Richard's face turned the color of an overdue mortgage notice. Ethan looked ready to faint. Angela pulled out another form, smaller, with neat handwriting along the margins. We will pause valuation proceedings until verification is resolved. Further engagement is contingent upon confirmed custodial control. Then she turned her gaze toward me. For a brief second, our eyes met. I didn't smile, didn't move. Just met her stare with the same quiet certainty that had carried me this far. She gave a tiny nod, almost imperceptible, before closing her laptop. The air in the room thickened like smoke. Ethan fidgeted with his pen. Richard's breathing grew heavy. The CFO looked like he'd just realized the stock options he'd been counting on were evaporating in real time. Angela stood, collected her papers, and said, We'll reconvene once the validation chain is properly certified. No one said a word as she walked out. The door shut behind her with the sound of something breaking that couldn't be fixed. I sat there, silent, my fingers resting on the velvet pouch inside my bag. The token wasn't heavy, but in that moment, it felt like gravity itself. They had forgotten who built the foundation beneath their empire. Now, they were standing on it, waiting for it to crack, and I hadn't even lifted a finger. Yet. The following week, the final due diligence meeting was set. Richard wanted it in the executive boardroom. Walnut-paneled, high-ceilinged, obnoxiously overlit. The kind of space used for either closing a massive deal or hiding a massive mistake. He sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, confidence painted on like a mask. Beside him was Ethan, freshly shaved and vibrating with counterfeit self-assurance. His blazer looked borrowed. His eyes looked terrified. I was invited as a courtesy, that poisonous phrase again. They wanted me visible, compliant, harmless. I said yes immediately. You can't appreciate a curtain drop unless you're sitting in the front row. The buyer's delegation arrived precisely on time. No wasted smiles, no hollow compliments. Angela led them in, same black briefcase, same composure that could turn a hurricane into silence. Behind her, the buyer's legal counsel and 2 analysts took their seats. You could feel the static in the air before a storm breaks. Richard started the performance. We're thrilled to be at this stage, he said, voice rehearsed to the syllable. Integration has been seamless. Ethan here has demonstrated remarkable leadership and vision. I've never been more confident in our future. Ethan nodded, beaming. It's been an honor continuing the foundation Julia built. He turned toward me with a smile that landed somewhere between pity and gloating. She really paved the way. I just nodded, the way one does when the eulogy is technically accurate, but the speaker doesn't realize you're still alive. The CFO leaned over and whispered to Ethan, "All systems go." Ethan straightened his blazer. "Then let's finalize escrow validation and close this thing." Angela didn't move. Her eyes flicked toward the buyer's counsel, who nodded. "Let's begin with protocol confirmation," the counsel said. "Chain of custody, escrow token, and vault logs." Ethan turned to the projector. The slide that appeared read, "Updated access workflow." It was a PowerPoint abomination. Boxes pointing to boxes, arrows looping nowhere. Labels like "New Authentication Streamlined Pathway." He started talking. "We've modernized the structure to simplify access. It's all integrated now. Cleaner? Leaner?" Angela blinked once. "Names on the token registry, please." Ethan hesitated. The CFO jumped in like a man diving in front of traffic. "The registry was in transition when we last synced systems." Angela replied without looking up. "No documentation reflects that." Ethan started again, voice cracking. We plan to consolidate the—" He stopped when he realized no one was saving him this time. The silence that followed was brutal. You could hear the soft buzz of the ceiling lights, the rhythmic tick of someone's pen tapping against paper. I closed my laptop slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed like a gavel. All heads turned. Richard frowned. "Julia, what are you doing?" "Just organizing my notes," I said softly. I reached down, unzipped my bag, and pulled out the small velvet pouch. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough for the movement to register. The faint scrape of fabric against the box filled the room. Angela's eyes tracked the sound. Ethan's hand froze midair. I placed the pouch gently on the table in front of me and rested my palm over it. Richard's voice dropped. "Julia, what is that?" Angela spoke before I could answer. Her tone was razor clean. "That's not the escrow key, is it?" The CFO inhaled sharply. Ethan's face drained of color. I met Angela's gaze and said calmly, "Clause 9.4 still applies. The vault remains protected under the original custodial chain. That key," I nodded toward the screen, "is irrelevant." The air went heavy. No one moved. Ethan stood, voice cracking. This isn't right. She's not even on the project anymore. I was told the registry was never updated." I interrupted. "No formal transfer, no buyer consent, no override filed. So unless this room wants to breach federal compliance and dissolve the deal, I suggest we all remember what signatures actually mean." Angela turned toward the buyer's counsel. He didn't speak, just sat back, folding his hands like a man who'd just witnessed a verdict being handed down. Richard's voice rose, brittle and furious. "This is sabotage!" I looked at him, steady and cold. "No, Richard, this is governance." Ethan tried to speak again, but Angela cut him off. "She's doing exactly what our agreement requires. Custodial control, verified protocol, legal chain intact." The CFO buried his face in his hands. "Oh, God," he whispered. "We're in breach." Angela nodded once toward her team. "We'll need a moment to confer privately." The buyer's delegation stood, gathering their folders with military precision. Angela paused at the door, turned to me, and said quietly, "Will you be available for a separate discussion?" "Anytime," I said. She nodded once more, then walked out, her team following close behind. The door swung shut behind them like a vault locking, and for the first time, Richard, Ethan, and the rest finally looked like what they truly were. A room full of men who had just realized the empire they'd built was standing on my name. The silence after the buyer's team left wasn't empty. It was loaded. You could feel the panic vibrate through the air like a subsonic hum. Richard stared at the door, jaw flexing, his confidence leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. Ethan just stood there, pale and blinking, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare that refused to end. I closed my laptop, smooth and slow, the click of the lid final enough to sound like a sentence being passed. Nobody moved. Ethan finally broke the stillness. "You planned this," he said, voice trembling. "You wanted to embarrass us." I looked at him, expression calm. "No, Ethan. You embarrassed yourself. You deleted the very clause that protected this company." Richard slammed his palm against the table. "Don't lecture me. You're done here, Julia. Do you understand? Done!" I tilted my head. "Then I guess you should have revoked my custodianship before announcing your son as the new project lead." The CFO groaned softly, muttering something about fiduciary liability. The CTO didn't look up from the table. He was too busy watching his career disintegrate. "You can't keep that key," Richard barked. "It's company property." I met his eyes. "Only if the buyer agrees. And right now, they don't trust anyone in this room except me." That shut him up. For the first time since I'd met him, Richard Cole looked small. Not because of age or guilt, but because the illusion of control had finally shattered. I stood, packed my laptop into my bag, and rested my hand lightly on the velvet pouch. "You built your legacy on my work, Richard. But you forgot one thing. The system doesn't care about legacy. It cares about integrity." Ethan slammed his pen down. "This isn't over?" I gave him a thin smile. "Oh, it's very much over. The question is just how public you want the ending to be." That landed like a blade. I turned toward the door and walked out. No one tried to stop me. The hallway outside was silent except for the steady hum of the building's ventilation. I passed the glass walls of the smaller offices, marketing, legal, operations, faces inside turning to watch me walk by. Whispers followed like a faint echo. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed. A single new email. From Angela Park. Subject, follow-up meeting. Confirmation. "We appreciate your clarity during the session today. Please meet with our legal and compliance teams tomorrow at 10 a.m. to finalize verification." I exhaled slowly. The elevator doors opened, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Not victory, not revenge, just equilibrium. The next morning, I sat across from Angela and the buyer's counsel in a smaller, quieter room downtown. No glass walls this time, no audience, just facts. She placed a printed document in front of me. "The chain of custody will remain under your oversight until the transition is properly filed," she said. "Once validated, we'll reissue custodial certification under new ownership." I nodded. "Understood." Angela regarded me for a moment. "You knew this would happen. I knew they'd forget the rules," I said. "They always do when ego gets involved." The buyer's counsel signed the paperwork, slid a copy across to me. "You may have just saved us $600 million in liability," he said. I smiled faintly. "Then I suppose we're even." As I left the building, the city outside felt sharper, cleaner somehow. The morning sun hit the mirrored glass of the towers like truth reflected back at itself. Later that afternoon, I received another message. From Richard Cole. Subject, "We need to talk." "Julia, whatever personal issue you have with this company, I hope you realize what you've done. You've jeopardized everything. Call me." I didn't reply. Some stories end with an explosion. Mine ended with documentation. That evening, I placed the velvet pouch inside a fireproof lockbox, added a note on top in blue ink. Property of Marin Holt Partners. Verified custodian, Julia M. Reynolds. Then I locked it shut. The token rested inside, gray and silent, its tiny LED blinking once, steady, rhythmic, alive. People think revenge is loud, that it roars. But real revenge? Real justice? It's quiet. It signs forms. It cites clauses. It leaves a trail of proof so clean no one can argue. In the end, they'd tried to erase my name from the deal. Instead, it became the only one that mattered.